one friend of mine, she was mowing her lawn with a John Deere 60-inch compact tractor, John Deere, and it was 4 acres, and it would take her about six or 7 hours each weekend to do it. She immediately buys 2 robots, automates it. She doesn't cut the grass anymore. She saves 300 hours a year not riding the John Deere.
That's
and so, yeah, that's one really big, really good case.
Welcome to The Roots of Success, the premier landscapers podcast that brings you the latest tips and strategies for successful landscape business. I'm Jim Calley, one of the principals and coaches of McFarland Stanford. Jason New and I started McFarland Stanford to coach landscape businesses after years in the industry ourselves. Now, more than 10 years since we began, McFarland has a deep bench of coaches and subject matter experts who work with our clients on very specific issues of business. Whether you're struggling with people, profits, or just day-to-day challenges, our coaches and guests have the real-world experience and practical advice to help you build a thriving and profitable landscape business.
Welcome to the Roots of Success podcast. I'm your host today, Kevin Kime with McFarland Stanford, and I am joined today with Bob Carey from Crest Outdoor.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for being with me today.
Well, thanks for coming. We're glad that you're here. Today, we're going to cover 2 topics on our podcast. We're going to talk about electrification in the landscape industry and autonomous lawn mowing. And first, I want to start with 2 quick questions just to tease us out a little bit here. What do you think the biggest myth landscapers believe when it comes to battery equipment is?
Lack of power.
Lack of power? That's pretty direct. Okay. What's the biggest misconception with autonomous mowers?
The biggest misconception with autonomous mowers, probably that they don't work in certain areas under tree cover and in certain areas now, but those obstacles have been overcome.
Yeah. Some basic misunderstanding of the technology or where it was maybe a couple of years ago. Okay, perfect. Well, Bob, I know this isn't your first time on the Roots of Success podcast. And the last time we had you here, you focused on maintenance and how to improve your maintenance crew and some of the efficiencies around that. Why don't you start by giving us a quick introduction about yourself, your background, how you arrived in the landscape industry, and then how you arrived at Crest?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do a quick rundown. I had my landscaping company, started, 12, 13 years old, and did that until I was 22 through high school and college, and had a decent sized business. And then immediately went and worked for a fantastic company in Washington, D.C. that was about $20 million, but 50% of it was reoccurring maintenance. So we had $10 million in reoccurring maintenance that I was really integral and part of the operations, and brought into a strategic team there to learn about the business and work on the business and instead of for it. And that really set a great career path for me. And I still am mentored by the owner of that company today. And then I continued to work in large landscaping companies that really were all scaling, not just like staying stagnant. And through that, I got to be part of the strategic teams that would implement new ERPs and automate. We took all 3 companies that I worked for prior had done paper timesheets, and we switched to mobile tracking and had work tickets for everything. And so through those transitions and implementing those ERPs, you learn a lot. And so I'm a data-driven guy. I really like forecasting, so it made a lot of sense.
Okay, that leads me to the next question. So what's harder, introducing a new software in a landscape company or rolling out electrification? Which may be a little complicated.
Well, it touches a lot of pieces of your business. So you have your CRM, you have your customer facing portions, you have your operations facing portions, you have your parts that are going to do your accounting, right? And so through all those parts and pieces, it can be hard. It can be very challenging, and having the right implementation person both on your team and outside your team with your systems manager that you purchased it from. You have to have a tight-knit group. But really, one of the most critical positions in a company is that person that is your integrator. You have to have in 2026, you got to have an integrator. It integrates all your systems together. And if you can, you want to have them on staff full time.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. I appreciate that introduction. Very, very helpful. It is important to always have your lead contact in any change management, a topic I very care deeply about. Maybe it'll be another future topic on our podcast. I know it's a topic I gave at our Connect conference in November. and I'm sure you'll hear more of in the future. But all right, so let's move on. Let's specifically talk about electrification in a landscape company. So what do you think is driving electrification most? Is it regulations? Is it customer demand? Is it labor? What is making a landscaper take a moment, pause, and reflect and see, hey, what should I be doing to electrify my landscaping maintenance division?
It truly is a multifaceted answer. There's different drivers throughout the United States geographically. In some areas like Bethesda, Maryland, Portland, Oregon, now on January 1st here, implemented leaf blower bans. Those absolutely accelerate things very rapidly. Outside of that, though, there are other drivers. Economics is certainly a driver for the companies that are willing to lean in and say, like, hey, here's what I spend today. Here's the challenges I have. Here's my downtime. Here's the fuel I'm using. Like, the guys that really know that data, they come to you. You don't have to come to them. And they say, what can I do? And you're like, great, you have the data. And now we can sit down and we can help you figure that out. There's not convincing that needs to happen with that. It's a business conversation. And then there are also people that just understand that the future is that people want quiet service. They want quiet, clean service. They want invisible service. Isn't it great whenever the work's just done and you didn't see or hear it happen? People understand that that's what people want. And the guys that do the invisible service first or the sensitive site service first, they're going to win the day, and everybody's going to catch on and have to have a invisible service, a service that really comes in and does the work. There's elder care homes, there's hospital systems, therapy clinics, even just business offices like we're talking on here today. We wouldn't be able to have our podcast if somebody's out here blowing with the gas blower. We would hear it in the background.
Right. That's a good point. Now, devil's advocate for you here. So I come from the pest control industry, and we spend a lot of time talking about taking the reduction of time on site and creating an out of sight, out of mind service, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we did, right? And one of the biggest things you always had to overcome from customers that I called on that were in the pest control industry, or even as a president of a pest control company, I personally had to overcome was, all right, how do I thread that needle of retaining an account, having that touch point with that customer, but then at the same time, to your point, giving value to the client or the homeowner or the property manager that they're looking for. So as a landscaper, I'm sure that they probably just heard you say, all right, an invisible service, and thought, wait a minute, that's part of my value. Being there is my value. I'm sure that's a common objection you hear. How do you overcome that?
I think it's a huge ad. The biggest detractor from the service, where people really just would complain about the service from in 2014 to 2019, when I worked in Washington, D.C., the homeowners there, they would say, we do not value the blowing. Nothing occurs in the blowing that's good. You're not taking anything away. You're just blowing it around. You're a when you're a landscape company, if you really take a real step back, you're a logistics company. You're taking a product there, or you're taking it away. If you treat your landscaping business as a logistics system and make a systematic approach to how you deliver, you will look at your business in a completely different fashion. And you should be taking something away because that adds value or bringing it. So you pruned the boxwoods, you deadheaded the roses, you raked out the landscaping, the mulch, you made it look beautiful, and you took the weeds away. The blowing doesn't add any value. A guy just walks around and makes a ton of air. And in some instances, it is the fastest commercial. It's the fastest way to get the job done. But that's in an industrial setting, right? And in industrial settings, we need to do things differently that align with that type of work, that style of work. And the blower is a fantastic product. I love using it. But for residential and even education facilities or hospitals, those type of places, they hired you to beautify the place, really, not just industrialize it. And so that takes an amount of touch. And then the blower is not doing that.
Yep. I wrote that down. That's a great one. You're a logistics company. And if you just approach your landscaping service as a logistics system, that's a great point. All right. So I'm a landscaper. I'm thinking about considering electrification. Where do I start? What accounts are best suited for electrification? Or is it an account? Is it a division? Is it the whole division? How have you seen successes? I'm sure it's a little bit of everything, but what's generally speaking your best first step?
I would say, Kevin, it's like sitting down with the financial manager for the first time. You could say, like, what should I do with my money? When you say, like, well, what are your goals, right? Do you want to retire early? Do you want to retire later? Are you planning on making like a boatload more money between now and then? And so you really have to look at every individual differently. And I come to them and I say, what's your 5-year plan for your business look like? Where do you want to grow it? What area are you going to get into? Maybe they say, Bob, I really am interested in grabbing a portfolio. I'd like to have Columbia Sports. I live in Portland, Oregon. So maybe I'd like to have Columbia Sportswear. I'd like to take a stab at that. I'd like to get Keen boots and some other places. And you say, hey, look, you can totally align. If I was going to align with that, I'd recommend that you do battery because you could report your ESG, which your environmental social governance and your reduction in carbon. Okay, that's great. Maybe JLL aligns with that. That's a property management company. Or it's a residential route. And you're like, hey, why don't you offer a quiet service? So it just depends on the prospect on what aligns and then what level do they want to take that to. And it really does come down to what does the next 5 years for your business look like? Maybe you're just like, I want to have the absolute lowest bid. Okay, that's going to look very different than the guy than someone else that is looking to have a account or portfolio that really values something else. So
yeah. So you mentioned earlier. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? So what I'm hearing is that there really isn't necessarily every business is different, every scenario is different, every account is different, and it may very well be just what do you want to accomplish? What does your client base look like, your regulatory environment that you're in, the area, the country that you're in, whatever it may be. If you mentioned earlier that you know your numbers. People who know their numbers come to you or someone like you when talking about electrification. That is something from an ACE peer group perspective. We harp all the time to our peer group members, right? Know your numbers, and we talk to them consistently on every peer group get together site visit that we have. So if you're talking about the numbers, what is the area that you have seen the fastest ROI? I know that's probably tough. Is it a blower as an example? Or what piece of equipment consistently has the largest downtime? Maybe just curious as to see where does the math just immediately make sense for some of these folks?
I really take pride in helping people have the best ROI. And I'm always going to go back to the most important thing, which is 90% of your business is spent on labor. So you go to the P&L, and if somebody said, hey, if you could save us 10% on any single line item and we'll give you 5% of the 10, you got to go straight for the biggest number. Statistically, you got to go to the labor. So what can you do to save labor costs? And for me, that's been the one that I look at, but there's more to the current climate than that. There's employee retention, using these products because it's an enjoyable solution, and hearing the sound from the other devices or smelling it. So there's more to it. There's other intangibles, but really, what can you do with your labor to save labor? And a lot of this with digitization now, with tracking of the units and their uptime, now you're going to eventually be able to get to where, and a lot of guys don't have this, but I really encourage them to do it. Get with a company that measures all of your sites and know every attribute. So what's an attribute? Attribute would be the computer drops a pin on every tree. You know exactly how many linear feet of edging are on the sidewalks. You know how many linear feet of edging are on the soft beds. You know how many square feet of mowing. You have that broken down by mower size that you're going to apply. And then you have these production rates that you've either taken some data from that you think from the field, and you've postulated and you say, like, okay, the worker I think he's walking 3.5 miles an hour to do edging. But what if you really know? And that's where we're going. And that's to take the data from the tool on that route day that your worker edged 6,500 linear feet. And then you have the actual data. Okay, this is how long he ran the edger. Now you have a real bid, a bid that matches the productivity of the person, not a guess. Because even today, most people just have a guess. And most people don't even have that. They just have, hey, we measured the entire site, beds plus lawn is 30,000, we charge 48 cents a square foot. And it's like, how is that broken up and delivered? How do you know if each service is profitable? It has to be broken down. But the guys that are the best, that are making the best profits, they get bought, they get acquired too, or just make the most profits. They have every service outlined and exactly how long it takes to do it.
Yep. You're speaking my love language. I don't know if you knew this, but in between corporate role at Dow Chemical and before arriving in the pest control world as the president of a company, I worked in an IoT, that's Internet of Things for those who may not know what that is. And so that we sensorized massive manufacturing facilities to do exactly that, which was to talk about what crews and or equipment are more productive and efficient during certain times, and to be able to create a digital twin of a machine and say, hey, this machine is going to fail at this point. You should take it down for preventative maintenance. It's crazy to me to think that the landscape industry has arrived at something very similar to that, where you can take and create true efficiencies. And I think a lot of these guys, I know we started this conversation talking about software, probably aren't even doing the basics, which is just taking your time in and time out. Like that's something I did in my past life. Was we had our rate card, to your point, and we wanted to manage it and figure out what the time on site for every one of our services across it. We always generalize everything. Well, we think our service takes about this long. Well, Is it really that? And are we really diving into it? And you've got some guys that are at 14 minutes, and maybe I need to coach somebody that you're not doing a good job at 14 minutes. But the other guy on the other hand is an hour and a half, right? So I think the importance there is data, right? Whether it's from your software, whether it's from equipment, etc. That's pretty impressive stuff. So your recommendation is essentially run a mini P&L at a job level and truly understand what that cost would be. And you're doing this on existing accounts as well as your recommendations to do this on existing accounts as well as on sites that you're putting the bid in on.
Yes. And you have to look at it as like, I have a very high level of vision for how I would operate things. That doesn't really, I don't want it to hold anybody back from like making the transition to battery. Could you just like grab the tools and equipment and put them in the truck and save between $1,000 and $4,000 today? Yes. Would you like to increase your gross profit by 20, 40%? Yes, you can. You do what we just mentioned, which is get your actuals, have every site measured, and create a strategy with actionable data. And then also what workflow plans are a big thing a lot of guys don't talk about is once a site gets over a certain size, you have got to have a human workflow plan on how you're going to do that. And then you give the plan to your workers, but you will get their feedback, right? You need their buy-in. So how would they approach the site, analyze how you would approach the site, come to a conclusion together as a team, deploy the plan and measure it and say, is it working? And then like, hey, let's make some tweaks and see if we can improve it. Maybe you didn't, maybe you make some more, but you do have to run it for a significant amount of time to make sure that, like, sometimes you have to workflow plan on a really large HOA because of seasonal changes. You might have to run it for 2 seasons before you can really say, okay, I think we've got 2 seasons under our belt with this workflow plan we're going to change. So we're getting a little bit off topic. We're getting pretty deep into like the master class of bidding and operational efficiencies of like a large site. But there's sites that we've worked at the scale, 360 acres, 2,500 homes. You need a workflow plan. And those are hard to find, and it's hard to come by somebody that can make one.
Yeah. Well, listen, we had you on the podcast talking about maintenance in the past. Of course, naturally, this conversation is going to go into maintenance. We figured that would probably happen today.
Yeah.
All right. So Bob, is it fair to say that part of the ROI that can be generated from electrification is just simply the fact, and maybe this is the paradigm shift to get people to wrap their mind around, is there is the ROI of the equipment that is driven by fuel savings, reduction in downtime, like some of the stuff that maybe they could probably wrap their mind around. But I think part of what you just said is that part of the ROI is that the equipment, that some, I don't know about all, but some electrified equipment gives you data to further dive into profitability at a site level. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that is true. Yes.
So boys and girls, men and women, everybody take note of that. Like, that is such a mind-blowing thing to wrap your mind around, that it is the microphone recording content to then help you make analytical decisions on down the road. For those of you that have it, that's pretty impressive stuff. Okay. So if you're a landscaper and you've decided, maybe you've sat down with your leadership team, you've discussed that you want to make this change, that electrification, that you at least want to maybe do a pilot or whatever it may be, just generally high level, 35,000 feet. What does that process look like? Is it a pilot? Is it a demo day? How do I start if I'm a landscaper to figure out what the capabilities are, and as far as equipment, brand, etc.?
For Crest, we'd have one of our business developers. There's 14, 15 throughout the country right now, plus a golf team. We would come out and we would take a look at, what do your current routes look like? Do you commercial or residential? How many people are on the route? What tools do they currently run? What's that makeup? All right, we will bring a set of battery tools, the same makeup out, product mix out for you to try. We'll give you training on how to use them. We'll give you training on how to set up the charging infrastructure. We'll look at your current power infrastructure and your breaker panel. We'll ask you to bring in an electrician to determine your capacity that's left over once you run the building. That way we can create some exhibits around how many crews you could convert just from your existing power once we know the makeup. But we focus on figuring out the makeup of batteries for the best solution, so you don't have way too many or not enough. And so we can do a measuring trial one of two ways. We have our Crest Cyber system, our Cyber Tank. If you use that device, when you use that device, it has a 4G SIM card when you set the batteries on the Cyber Tank, and uploads to the cloud at a dashboard and shows you how much energy you consume that day. If you're not going to use Cyber Tank and you're going to use our batteries, where you're going to take a lot more energy with you instead of have a little bit longer a little bit longer charge time versus the 8-minute charging, we can also aggregate that data and show you how much energy you consume during that workday after you bring them back to charge. So by the next morning after they've all charged, we can see with a Wi-Fi outlet how much energy you consumed on that route day. So I typically ask people to go run for 1 week or 2 weeks. I aggregate the data, and from that I can sit down, and now I'll actually sit down with these prospects and we'll look at all the other brands that they're potentially going to purchase, and I will break down for them exactly how many batteries they need to buy based on that aggregate total energy consumed from my trial. And then that will give them an idea of like, hey, you actually, like one guy, he was met with a competitive brand. They were saying he needed about 16 batteries per person. It ended up that he needed 23 once we really did the trial to see how much energy he consumed. And so that was quite a bit of battery packs, because they were small packs. And then something equivalent from Crest, he was able to just get 2 to do what they were doing with that. And so it was a no-brainer once we looked at that, but it was really eye-opening for him to, once you start looking at that amount of energy that you need.
Yeah. So what I heard in all of that is that you should look for somebody who's going to come in and take an analytical approach to what you need to establish, and then really, for lack of better terms, be a true partner in this process and help you understand all of the ins and outs that go with it, right? All right, let's pivot for a minute. We spent quite a bit of time talking about electrification. Let's talk now about autonomous lawnmowers. So the idea around this actually came from one of our peer group members, Sterling West. Had this idea I should talk to you about this. And it was mainly around his deployment about autonomous lawnmowers. So when landscapers hear this, they probably imagine immediately that there are zero labor involved with an autonomous lawnmower. So give me the truth here. What's the reality when it comes to autonomous mowing?
It goes back to application, right? It's like the right fit for the right situation. If you fit it wrong, it's not going to do what you intended. So you do need to sit down with someone and figure out, like, how am I going to fit this to the correct site, and learn about that so you can start to deploy it yourself. But no, when the deployment aligns, there are still other things to do. It's like having an irrigation system, right? You have an irrigation technician. He comes out, he does a startup, he does 3 adjustments, or maybe 2 on-site visuals, checks, even though they're smart Wi-Fi based controllers, and then a shutdown. It's similar with the mower. You're going to have someone that comes out, does the initial launch in the spring. Maybe there's a cleanup before it goes out because there's pine cones, pine needles, leftover leaves, and maybe even potentially a first mow if it's been a really warm spring and it's snowing on and off or raining on and off, and it's going to be a late launch. You might do a first initial mow with a traditional mower, and then you start running your robot, and your robot runs until October 15th, maybe when the first leaves start to fall. This is the robots really stay in 2 camps. So all this stuff, there's so many camps now. You really have to be specific. So this is leave behind robots, because now we have the Crest Voyager autonomous zero turn that you take with you. So right now I'm just speaking to leave behind robots.
Okay.
And that's the deployment strategy. And then end of the season, winter, you're going to bring it back in, you're going to clean it off, get it prepped for the following spring.
Cool.
So, but yeah, I would say 2 or 3 blade changes a season, but it would depend on the site. If you have lots of sand, you got volcanic rock that's in the beds, or some kind of rock that like flows in the lawn and hits the blades, like that's going to wear them out more. But in some really clean settings, I've seen 3 months out of a set of blades, and I was really blown away. And then it just depends on the application.
So when you think about that application, again, same question, similar as the electrification. So I'm a landscaper. I'm thinking about deploying some leave behind autonomous mowers. Is there kind of areas that make sense, like sites that you have that are large, like an HOA style community, that are far away from your home base or your office? What are some just general areas you've seen a lot of success with leave behind autonomous mowers?
We've seen really great success here in the Pacific Northwest with homeowners on acreage that just can immediately deploy their own robot, instead of having either they're mowing it themselves, or they have a landscape company that they just switch, and then their landscape company maybe only does bed maintenance, but they just deploy their own robot. That's been massive. And this is our KR236. That's our robot that'll mow about 5,300 square feet per hour on average. And so one friend of mine, she was mowing her lawn with a John Deere 60-inch compact tractor, John Deere, and it was 4 acres, and it would take her about six or 7 hours each weekend to do it. She immediately buys 2 robots, automates it. She doesn't cut the grass anymore. She saves 300 hours a year not riding the John Deere. That's one really big, really good case. But they come in all shapes and sizes, really, because a good friend of mine also, he had a farmhouse on his property. It has 9,000 square feet of turf. We put in a small robot from Crest. Boom, that's done. It's over with. And for the next couple of years, that robot just cuts the grass, and we've had fantastic success with that. And it's just 9,000 square feet. And so it's really just about understanding. I tell everybody, like, just buy a robot. Just get a robot. The barrier of entry is pretty low. You can get a Crest robot for as low as like $2,000, $2,500. Get a Crest robot, deploy it yourself, or get training to deploy it from one of the Crest business developers or your local dealer. Launch it, understand it, play with the app, and then go apply it. And maybe build a champion in your team that's going to figure that out. My recommendation is always the irrigation manager. The irrigation manager
sounds like a great solid fit, right? It's a very similar approach to how they run their operations of their division of the company. So it sounds like a easy fit.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So when you look at this, so you mentioned 2 examples there for residential. So are you seeing companies that do maintenance historically? Lawn mowing has been the least profitable part of the landscaping business. Are you seeing people who maybe got away from the mowing or didn't want to do the mowing get into it more by tag teaming this robotic approach to it? Or how are you seeing landscapers take this approach, whether it's residential or commercial?
So there's a lack of labor is a big one. There's going to be 2026, I think, is going to be a really interesting year with labor. We have a labor pool that has a few things happening. Aging out is one of them. And without people to really backfill their spots that want to take these roles, we have pressure on H-2B visas, and we have pressure on our current working class. What we'll see is that construction in these times, when we have a construction boom, construction really puts a lot of pressure on landscape labor and offers higher wages, and construction attracts them. Well, with less labor to do construction, they're really going to draw on our landscapers and try to entice them over to do construction. And since people are just taking construction loans, they can just pass the cost along for the higher wages. With landscaping maintenance, as you know, you have a maintenance contract. You aren't typically trying to push more than like a 6% contract increase, I would say, before the person's like, I'm going to go look for other prices. And so you can't just increase wages that fast because your clients can't absorb it that fast. So what can you do? You automate. So the guys that are forward thinking, they're starting to automate so they can see let's see if it does work and can we make it work? And the guys that are willing to apply themselves to make it work, they make it work. So we do have commercial settings where we worked with a landscaper here that does a seminary complex that has 6 acres of turf up above. They launched 2 robots on it, great savings. The labor was reallocated to work on bed care. You're able to improve the quality of the site, but you don't have as much debris that you're hauling off. The lawn is cut 3 times a week, so it really looks different all the time. And they liked it. They loved that it was quiet. And so they went and they had another piece of lawn that they were mowing that they were like, let's add a third mower. We want to add our own to this area you guys don't do because we like how quiet it is. And then, Kevin, you mentioned Sterling West. He's with Newport Ave Landscaping out of Bend, Oregon. He had a unique property where it's a high-end RV resort, and they didn't want rocks hitting the sides of the RVs. These RVs have expensive paint jobs. So he asked me if we could deploy robots. So we deployed 3 robots and automated the whole facility. It's 196 RV spots. It's complex. And at first I told him I didn't think it was possible. And I'm usually not that guy. I'm like, I was like, Sterling, I don't know. I think I told him no twice of like the obstacles we're going to need to overcome to do this are pretty great. And we went out and we did it. And I got proven wrong for sure. And we did it and it works and it's working great. And then I think that was overcoming such a large challenge that Sterling was like, all right, we need to try these in more properties and let's get them going. He's gone all in on that.
So there's obviously the physical challenges that you mentioned, like the RV park that you'd have to overcome, like whether it's the physical layout of the land, the environment, you name it. What other objections have you seen maybe from like contact managers or the contacts that you have or managers that you have on site for those properties? Has there been any pushback? I know you've referenced several times it's quieter and so there's a lot of positive things. What other feedback or objections do our landscapers likely to run into as they talk to homeowners or property managers?
One of the bigger objections is it's going to get stolen. And I haven't seen that. I've deployed 70 robots this year, and a friend of mine works in Seattle. He has a fully robotic landscaping company. He's run it for 5 or 6 years. He said he's had 3 or 4 that have been taken, and he got all 4 of them back. Could damage be a thing? I think yes, damage could be a thing, but I think it's such a small outlier that when you have a intelligent conversation with someone in a meeting and you tell them, they bring something up and you say, hey, let's not get focused on the 1% of the what ifs. What can we do with the products that we have? And in most areas, that's not the case. Would there be areas where I think it could be a challenge to overcome, maybe in an inner city, in a park setting, and it's potentially, yeah, maybe. Were we going to overcome that? Absolutely. I mean, there's built-in systems in the robot where if it's picked up, it lets you know instantly. It has tracking inside that stays on for days with a backup battery to continue to let you know where it's located. So a lot of these challenges are very easily overcome. But yeah, I think that's a misconception.
Yeah, you hear the same thing with large equipment, right? I have a landscaper recently I was talking to that had a large cat piece of equipment taken off of the property. But again, it's tracked, it's IoT, it's Internet of Things. We know where it's at,
Yeah.
it's communicating. All right, so Bob, let's just to bring us home a little bit here. If I'm a landscaper that has the goal here in 2026 of trying something, whether it's electrification of some maintenance accounts or whether it's autonomous or robotic mowing, what's my first step? What should I take?
In 2026, you want to have a written plan. You want to understand where you're going. Have a written plan on where's your company going? How does electrification fit into the strategy? And then how does autonomous mowing fit into the strategy? Basically do a SWOT analysis as well and say, with the labor, what are we going to need to do in 3 seasons to reach the growth potential that we're planning on? And what is that going to take to do it? And so have an automation strategy. And an automation strategy would be reviewing routes that lend themselves well to automated mowing. And to get that, you need to sit down with someone, like someone from Crest that could help you determine what are you going to roll out and what routes and how, and make a new architecture.
Perfect. Okay, last question for you. Give us your 3 recommendations for landscapers when evaluating both electrification and autonomy. I know that's a little bit of a similar question, but I'm going to ask you to get a little bit more granular. So 1 to 2 for each one of them.
1 to 2 things that when you're going to assess handheld power equipment and autonomous mowing.
Yep.
I'm just going to go back to the one thing I had been saying from the beginning, which was get with someone who's an authority figure on these topics. Be transparent and open with them so that they can get you the right solution. Be open with your information so you can align and have a goal, a plan, and write down what you're looking for as a business to gain from this info. What are you going to glean from this information? Is it going to be runtime? And what do those runtime metrics look like? Is it going to be power? How am I, as my own company, if it's Kevin's Landscaping, how are you going to assess what the power is? How high is the grass going to be? How low are you going to run the mower? And get granular with it if you need to get into that level of detail. Does the grass need to be wet? Are you going to bag it? Write down what you need to measure before you launch the trial or before you assess the equipment. Don't just go into it and say, like, hey, we're just going to try this stuff. Have measurables and fill those in. And then sit down with us after, or sit down with your own team after and say, we took this approach, a scientific approach, to 2 or 3 different brands, and here's the check boxes, and they give them a score. So, yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I had 5 things that I wrote down during your conversation today. And so the first is that have an implementation person from your team to help you implement whatever that change from the topic that we had today is. Know your numbers. We talk about that in all of our peer groups as it is, but if you know your numbers, it just makes more sense. It makes it easier for you to wrap your mind around it. The phrase you mentioned earlier, that as a landscaper, you're in logistics, and that you should build a system that helps manage that for your properties that you're maintaining. The next is that electrification, your equipment is essentially just additional tools to record data to help drive additional profit within your company, which was probably my personal biggest takeaway from this conversation. It's not about getting a blower to accomplish what you think the blower is there to accomplish. It's really recording how long it takes to do something in the job, right? And you know your numbers more at that site level, which is awesome. And then your last point that you just mentioned, that stood out to me, which is like, hey, have a written plan. Whatever that change may be, in this case, talking about electrification or automation or robotics, have a plan. What is the plan that you want to do for the individual site that you're looking for, your demo? How are you going to communicate it with your team? How are you going to assess 2 or 3 manufacturers to help you get there once you have your plan in place? All of which I think is super important. So, Bob, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for coming back on our podcast and helping our landscapers out around this really electrifying topic.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Roots of Success, brought to you by the subject matter experts at McFarland Stanford. Have a question you want our coaches to tackle in a future episode? You could submit that at mcfarlandstanford.com/podcast. And to find more helpful content from McFarland Stanford, follow us on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. If this or any of our episodes have piqued your interest in ACE peer groups, we encourage you to join us at ACE Discovery. Just check out the events tab at mcfarlandstanford.com. This is Jason New, co-founder and principal at McFarland Stanford. We'll see you next time.